Doctor, good morning to you. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Rennie, and good morning to your listenership.
It is great to have you here. Thank you so much. And I go immediately across to your left, and there is the blogger, there is the advocate, the no water in my mouth for what I have to say. Lady, she is Rhoda Bharath. Miss Bharath, good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Bishop. How are you doing?
I am fine,
Thanks
thank
for
you.
having me.
I thank you very much for coming.
Good morning to your listeners and to the two gentlemen on my right and my left. I
Yeah.
feel well supported.
I say it's a wonderful combination, as a matter of fact. And let me go immediately to your left, and there is the veteran journalist, Errol Pilgrim. Errol, good morning to you.
Well,
thank you so much.
Pleasant morning to you, Rennie, and to your listeners, and it's good to be here again.
Yes, well, we all here, and we all happy to be here, and we've got a lot to talk about. I had a variable put on the table before me, and like I said, there is no way you're going to walk in to have breakfast and you meet folks like yourself or meet anybody and not have a conversation about what's picking up all the air in the room. We had a former housing minister who was removed. The Integrity Commission passed a report. The leader of the party, the prime minister, said, I cannot keep this lady out waiting in the wings, particularly when the Integrity Commission said there is nothing more to come there. He said, okay, let us get fair. And folks said, yes, fair play must be introduced here. As such, he went on to name that former minister of housing into the Ministry of Public Utilities. And folks said, good, second chance. And oops, comes the swearing-in ceremony. And then a picture. And some questions raised. Some questions raised not because the person in the picture had done anything wrong, but because of the general feeling of many people as to, one, this person, two, the attire, three, the ability to pass below the radar of security forces, which is to say go against protocol. We are talking about the new Minister of Public Utilities, Marlene McDonald. We are talking about Mr. Burke, who is a community leader in her area, in one of her constituents, but who showed up while his name was not on the invitation list at the president's house and was taken and took pictures with the president. I'm going to start, let me go. I'm going to start by Errol. Errol, take a look at this situation. Anything here that you find warranting the concern that we are hearing?
Well, I am a bit confused about the objectivity of the goodly lady minister. I mean, here you are in a situation where you're coming out of a rough patch and you are getting yourself involved in what could be referred to as an unforced error. Why did you have to invite, or if not invite, to make sure that a person is there present in the company of the Prime Minister and the President of the Republic, who has questions hanging over his name as to whether he's a national security risk or not? And this in itself is something for the Prime Minister to deal with seriously, because whether or not Mr. Burke has been found guilty of anything, he is on the radar, on the national security radar, for several things and questions about his position possibly as a security risk.
So you were as bewildered as the rest of the nation as to why he was there. Just that our listeners be very clear. Mr. Burke did account and say she never invited me. In fact, it was the contractor. She invited Mr. Dapwal, who invited me, and I went with him. Curiously, the minister later said, I've got two guests upstairs. I don't know which two guests she was referring to, because altogether on her list, she had 4 people. Right? There were 4 people there, including the wife, the Mr. Dapple and his wife. And she had 4 people up there. And I don't know which 2 people she referred to. That raises another question. I see Mr. James twisting his head. So, Ms. Bharath, I will ask you to hold your tongue for a moment, as difficult as, you want to go there? You want to go there. He said ladies first. Let's go to Ms. Bharath. What is your read of this situation, Rhoda?
My read, number one, it is immaterial it is immaterial whether or not he was on the guest list. What is most important is that when Mr. Burke arrived at the house, whether or not he was on the actual, 4-person guest list or not, the person to take him upstairs and allow him to have clearance to be upstairs is Minister MacDonald, right? So she is the person that would be responsible for him getting upstairs and getting within proximity of the Prime Minister of the country and the President of the country. So you have the issue of the national security breach there, one, and the person who would have allowed for that opening into President's house, because he was let in, one, because they believed that he might have been one of the two unnamed persons on her guest list. And then when he got in and was asked to wait downstairs, the only reason he got upstairs is because of her.
Let's make that clear for our listeners, because part of what we are hearing today is that the minister had 4 people on her list, but she called after requesting that 2 additional people be put there, and she will supply the information to them at a later time. Please go ahead.
Right. The other problem that arises, apart from the national security risk now, would be the relationship between the state and business people. Because one of the comments that has been circulating is that Mr. Burke is a businessman, and that is fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with being a businessman. But when you see members of the business community that close to people who are as close to the Treasury as Ms. MacDonald would be as a policy maker and a member of cabinet, you then have to ask questions about the independence of our MPs, the security of the Treasury, and the impact that the business community continues to have on the Treasury.
We can get to that question of the kind of people that surround people in a big way, but that's for later on. Dr. James is holding his fire. Let's get across to him, Dr. Winford. James, sir.
There is no real fire. My colleagues have said it all, I imagine, except perhaps to observe that, or to ask oneself, did Miss MacDonald not know? Was she innocent of the suspicions, the suspicious clouds sitting above Mr. Burke's head? Did she not know? And the second thing is, was she operating on the principle that you are innocent until proved guilty?
Which is a good premise. I think we are all innocent until proven guilty. And it does raise the question now, because the Prime Minister reportedly intervened, had conversation with her, will have more conversation with her today. He is privy to a lot of information as head of the national security body in the country. And depending on what he sees will encourage, or rather influence, that determination as to if something was done wrong. And I'm glad that you said that, Dr. James, because on the one hand, I see a lot of things wrong here. But there is one point that I don't want, that I try not to have myself walk into the avenue of making judgments on any person when they have not been convicted of any crime. All right, because Mrs. MacDonald makes a little point there. I heard the gentleman, and I'm very careful that I want to hear the people actually say the things themselves. And one of the things he said, I am from the database, said, is that the reason why I should not be there?
It still does not. It still does not challenge the second point that I raised about a member of the business community and an alleged financier of the MP being there at the swearing-in ceremony, and the questions that it raises. Because, in all fairness, if we were to see financiers, other sorts of financiers showing up at the swearing-in ceremonies of ministers, we would have questions to ask as well.
Yes, Rhoda Bharath, that's the voice here that you just heard. Let's go back to Errol Pilgrim. Errol, what do you think will come of this situation? Because at the end of the day, we have to look as to what we see coming of this situation. I'm going to pass it around the table just to hear everybody's opinion on that. Errol?
Well, I think the whole situation has put Dr. Rowley in what they refer to as a monkey pants, because he has to take some kind of action. He cannot fail to see the question of the national security impact that this has. And as the chairman of the National Security Council, you rightly said that he may be in possession of information that the rest of the country does not have. So that he has a very difficult decision to make that could be embarrassing to him, whether he makes that decision or not. Because the country is asking several questions about the contact that his ministers may have with certain cloudy figures and so on. So that I think I do not envy his position, nor would I envy the decision that he ultimately has to make.
You would not hazard where you think this will go, do you?
Well,
Yeah, I think.
You wonder, well, why Marlene McDonald again? You know, and it boggles the mind. It really boggles the mind.
Judgment,
Yeah.
judgment. Okay, let's go across to Rhoda Bharath. I'm almost certain I know where she's going on this, but let her articulate and speak for herself. Miss Bharath.
The Prime Minister has to fire Minister MacDonald. There is no question about that. As a matter of fact, my understanding is that there are other members of the cabinet, other ministers who have stated their utter disagreement with what happened recently and have even threatened walking out. So I think the Prime Minister is under pressure from a number of sides. One, you have him having reinstated Miss MacDonald as a member of cabinet, still under a cloud, and people questioning his judgment there, but him being able to justify why he would have put her back in. And then within 2 days of her being back in, she has done something that certainly publicly questions his judgment and his trust and confidence in her. And you have other members of the parliament who have a problem with her presence there, as well as calls from some parts of the public, not all of the public, but some parts of the public. I think he's under incredible amounts of pressure, and the only way to ease the pressure will be to have her removed as a minister. That's my take on it.
Dr. James.
Well, except the Prime Minister is in possession of material information that we are not in possession of, the path for him seems pretty clear. So he will have to explain to, if he does not act in accordance with Rhoda's opinion, then he will have to explain to the nation something the nation is currently unaware of. But he is in a spot of bother.
All right. Do I have concurrence among my guests here this morning, Dr. Winford James, Rhoda Bharath, and Errol Pilgrim, that somebody at the Garden Emergency Branch must go home?
I certainly think that there are people at the office of the president that have serious questions to answer. I've been advised that the office of the president has already asked for a report into what has happened. Yep. But there's one other person who was on that guest list that we haven't raised a question about at all. Mr. Carew, who is the person, he was part of that whole Integrity Commission investigation into Ms. MacDonald. He was also there as well, as part of her entourage and as part of her party. And there are ways in which there seemed to be a lot of exuberance exhibited by the minister on that day, and questions about her decision making.
So it's kind of in your face.
Very in your face.
It's brashness, uncontrolled.
Significant other different consideration. Go ahead, Errol Pilgrim. Your final take on this. You get the final word on this.
Well, I think that Dr. Rowley has to set a precedent now that when there's such an event happening, that the list be vetted, if not by himself, but by the entire cabinet, if that is possible. Because, a minister or a parliamentary secretary or representative may say, listen, I have a certain level of support in my constituency, people who have been working for me and with me and helping me to further the program and so on. And I need to get these people there. But she sees that at one level. She does not possibly see the impact of bringing the so-called community leader who may be involved in a lot of questionable activity, to the president's house, so that the prime minister perhaps has to vet in future the list of people. And why should these people be there in the first place?
Is it innocence or defiance or both?
Both.
On Marlene's part.
I think both. I think it is almost political childishness. You would expect, especially, from somebody coming out of 18 months of being in the bamboo, to be more careful with what she's doing.
I think most artfully articulated this morning is what you just said. Yes. There is a degree of political immaturity that is frightening here. Thank you so much. Let us go on to the other area. We shall see before the day is over where the MM story takes us. I want to get across now to what brought us together in the first instance, and this is an article written by Errol, Errol Pilgrim. He's the one who wrote the story. He said, "I'll keep writing until black justice happens." He says, "The temptation is to take the easy way out, to avoid issues that are widely regarded as taboo and off-limit, like race and ethnicity, or more specifically, the racial and ethnic perils that the black man in Trinidad and Tobago has had to endure to the advantage of other racial and ethnic groups." You were saying from your articles, from my extrapolation, my summation of it, is that it is not an even playing field for the young black man, and you make a link of that into the criminality that we see many of the young folks, young black Afro-Trinidadians involved with. Specifically, where do you see, lay the picture for our conversation here from your article, specifically, where do you see the injustices most detrimentally manifested, and articulate what this disadvantage is?
Well, you see, all that I've written is not to say that there are not examples of black men, young black men, being successful. Mm-hmm. And successful meaning that they possibly were able to have a good profession and to have a family and a home and so on. And that is juxtaposed against the situation where there is a vast pool of black people, particularly young black men, who could not look into the future and see anything positive, and they are so preyed upon by people who are better off, but who want to dabble in all sorts of criminal activity through them, that they are offered, monetary goods, monetary benefits, whatever, to get involved in crime. And I mean, the communities that are so affected are aware of what is going on. I mentioned in one of the articles a situation of a 14-year-old secondary school pupil who was drinking rum, bringing weed to school, and harassing girls and bullying other people and so on. And someone asked him, "Well, why are you getting on like this? What is there in the future for you if you continue like this?" And he said, "Ma'am, let me tell you plain, I don't expect to live to see 21, so I have to do everything now." And my question is, how many times is that replicated in the minds of others like him?
Is this deviance, however, attributable to a particular group and really the cause of stymied or hurdled opportunities? I mean, what are we talking? Is that what you're saying?
I am saying it is particularly involved where young black men are concerned.
Mm-hmm. Let me take it across to the panel here, and we will come back because there are many parts of this we want to go into. Rhoda, I know you and Dr. James had the opportunity to look at the article, and that's why we're here this morning. What is your take on what Errol is saying in this specific area?
I tend to look at the problem as being a problem that tackles the working class, and so I'm not looking at it as specific to a gender or specific to an ethnic group. For a number of reasons, just based on observation, having lived in central Trinidad, worked in northeast Trinidad, and been a part of the secondary school system, I have encountered just as many non-black, so let's say brown persons, who are part of this very dispossessed working class that are experiencing much the same problems. Because they are so dispossessed, they're prey, easy prey for people who are looking for foot soldiers for the criminal industry. And we need to start talking about crime here as an industry because it employs people and it has a hierarchy, it has its own human resource infrastructure, and it has ways in which it compensates people. So you have a crime industry and you have, I think, social service dysfunctions and education dysfunctions that allow for the employees of this crime industry to be produced and to be put out there. And I don't think I don't think that it tackles just one ethnic group or one gender, because there are ways in which women have become part of this crime industry that we don't necessarily discuss, because their bodies don't end up on the front pages of the newspapers with bullets in them in the same way, right? And part of me is also hesitant about talking about it being prevalent to black males alone, because of how media functions.
Agreed, but disproportionately, I think, is what Errol is saying. It is to this quote-unquote marginalized community. You disagree with that?
And I will agree with what Errol is saying based on how it is depicted in media, but I haven't seen any stats from the CSO to be able to say, well, all right, I can go with it this way. So based on observation, let me put it this way. Based on observation, what Errol is saying it makes sense to me. But based on statistics, I don't have the statistics to say this is exactly the case. And then, having worked in secondary schools and lived in central Trinidad, to me it comes across as there being pretty much on par in terms of females and males being exploited by the system, and Indo and Afro dispossessed persons being pulled into criminal activity.
That's the blogger. That's Rhoda Bharath, an advocate. Let's go over to the political analyst. He has been for a long time working with a lot of young people in different areas from the University of the West Indies. He's a former senior lecturer. Dr. James, the contention, what is proffered by Errol, on the one hand, that the marginalized community is driven into an area of crime because of lack of opportunity. Rhoda is at variance with that. How do you weigh in?
Well, I don't think Errol is saying that the problem does not exist elsewhere. It's just that he was focused on a particular aspect of it. But I can't imagine, and he's here with us, that he's saying that this is a problem that is confined to black boys. I don't think black people. I don't think he's saying that. But his article for me is an introduction to the problem in response to what Mario Anthony Sabga, I think.
Mario Aboud Sabga.
It's an introduction.
Sabga Aboud.
Sabga Aboud. Mario Sabga
Aboud.
Aboud.
The other way.
All right. Well, we must get the details right. So, it's a response to the interview with Bourdain, and it was an interview that outraged a lot of people, continues to do so, because not unlike what has happened in Marlene's case, it's an ethnic in-your-face interview that seems to suggest that a particular ethnicity has special gifts and understandings and abilities far and away superior to the gifts of other groups. And it is because of that they have been enriched and we have been, comparatively speaking, impoverished. So there's an outrage about that, and there's an outrage that people could say things after riding the backs of a working population that made them rich, could say that to an international audience and claim that they're Trinidadians and Tobagonians. So that is one part of it. Good? But we must be careful that we do not respond emotionally to ethnic problems. And it's not only ethnic, but there's an ethnic side. We must be careful. As an academic, I know you have to have the information. You have to do the research. You have to have the evidence. Rhoda was talking about the lack of statistics. She doesn't have them, so she can't make certain conclusions. But we all need to familiarize ourselves with the studies that have been done. And we also have to have the survey of living conditions that every country has to be doing, has to have done. So we got to get all that information. We have to diagnose the problem properly, because we all have to live in this space, but hopefully we will have to live in this space in a meritocratic way. In a meritocratic way. That is the best way And when you look at the so-called meritocracy in Trinidad and Tobago, it's clear that it does not exist. When you look at the situation, it doesn't exist. So, when I read Errol's article, I got the sense that he was offering a preliminary diagnosis of the economic conditions that have allowed that ethnic group, the Syrian Lebanese. I know Gary is saying that Syria is not an ethnic group, but in Trinidad and Tobago, Syrians are part of an ethnic group. Maybe it's a country outside of Trinidad and Tobago. When people of that extraction come and are part of this diverse population, they are an ethnic group. But I read Gary's letter as well. What I'm saying here is that Errol did not go so far as to proffer solutions. What he has done is to offer preliminary diagnosis of the state of affairs, an unhappy state of affairs. And what he did was to counterpoint what some people might call the obscene wealth of a particular ethnic group, right, with the comparable poverty of the rest of the population.
Well,
and he's talking about distribution. He's talking about examples and so on, but it's a preliminary thing. I'm sure Errol can go much deeper. What he hasn't done, and I'm not saying he's incapable of doing it, is to offer us solutions. But solutions can only come based on a proper diagnosis of the situation.
Well, he's right here. So
yes, I'm just saying.
Yes.
But that's my take when I read it. That Errol can go much deeper. But to go much deeper means that he has to go to the library, at the school, at the University of West Indies, sit down long hours, see the research that has been done, talk to people, the researchers who have researched this thing, including the economists. Some economists have done work on that. And get a good sense.
Well, let me go to Errol. Errol, because essentially the question here challenges the absence of data in your conclusions. So please, I'm going to stay back here and have it among the panelists right here.
One of the suggestions that I possibly made in some of the articles is that there has to be another look at the education system.
Yes.
And to see whether the ethnic distribution of successful students is reflected in something that is not happening for all of them equitably. And I remember Dr. Rowley, when he was a member of the Manning cabinet, suggesting that at one of the tertiary educational institutions should lower the standard for admittance to young black boys to get them involved in tertiary education. And that was like, he was taken to task for that, even from within his party and from within the cabinet. And of course, the opposition went to tongue on it and saying that he wants to set a precedent that would not hold in Trinidad and Tobago of affirmative action, and it is the beginning perhaps of getting something done. If we should look at what Rowley was saying and why he was saying it, so that even though that may have been said several years ago, today the situation has to be many times worse. That young black people are just dropping off the radar. I mean, they are not being part of the functional society, as it were. That they are. I mean,
Rhoda, that is more description.
Yes.
I mean, you seem to be going in the direction of a solution when you invoke what Rowley said. But unfortunately, what I heard from you as a report on what Rowley said does not get specific enough for us to say, here is a solution to one of our deeply social deficiencies. I'm not getting that yet. So what I'm asking is whether we are ready to participate in a discussion about solutions to the problem. Let me just make a counterpoint to what you're saying. You're focused on misery and misery surrounded and little black boys. But what about Winford James? I am not rich. I mean, I was a salaried man for a long time, but I don't own what the Syrian Lebanese group owns. I don't own the businesses. I don't get government contracts that enrich me.
You're meant to be the buffer zone. That's what.
Well, yes, but still, but Errol didn't get there. What I'm saying is that you can't consider me a wealthy person in the same way that you might talk about Gary Aboud, for example, or Anthony Sabga. You can't, and that is part of the reaction to what Mario said.
If I may jump in, I think the real issue that we're all skirting around here is the whole business of resources and access to resources, right, and how it's distributed. Yeah. And the underlying thing that I think people have been responding and reacting to with regards to Mario Sabga Aboud's statements and Peter George's statements. Let's not forget that Peter George was sitting down in there and talking about the buffer zone and the haves and the have-nots, because I find people ignoring Peter George, and he is my focus.
More dangerous.
Right? He is far more dangerous because Mario Sabga Aboud essentially made comments that are actually factual. They're a small minority and they're very powerful, right? So let's start asking ourselves this. How does a small minority become powerful? You arrive here at around the turn of the 19th century with trading materials and resources. And that's something that at least one ethnic group that arrived here as a form, but let me not say arrived here, that was brought here as a form of labor did not have. Enslaved people came here, and enslaved people were brought here with no resources whatsoever. Middle Eastern people arrived here, and they arrived here with resources to trade. They came here as a community. They were allowed to settle as a community, to bond and function as a community. The black community here did not have similar treatment.
You are contesting the narrative.
So I am contesting the narrative of hard work and sacrifice. Miss me with that foolishness about hard work and sacrifice. Then you need to start looking at the way in which our society is structured. There's a lot of colorism that is linked to classism here. Black people cannot go to the bank and access the same facilities that people of a lighter hue.
Even in 2017.
Even in 2017, that people of a lighter hue can go to banks and access. There is still a lot of stigma associated with having melanin in your skin. And it is on the basis of those things, Errol, that I can agree with the statements that you make in your column, right? So as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of qualitative data to support the points that you raise about disparity with the black community and also disparity with the black male community, because black males are seen to be as more dangerous, or rather as the most dangerous group in the society,
so Rhoda,
especially young black
bring you
males.
Back because you're into a good thing. I don't want you to go astray. How do we redistribute the wealth? And first of all, do you accept that there should be a redistribution? Because my last check of the facts reveals that 10% of the population, not the 1%, 10% of the population owns 90% of the wealth.
Right.
So, am I saying, is that an acceptable state of affairs? And there's ethnicity related to the ownership, as you know. Or should we take policies to redistribute that wealth more equitably?
Well, then let me respond to you.
Yes.
If the purpose of a government, right, is to spearhead policies and also to caretake the treasury and the distribution of resources in a country, then obviously you cannot continue to have a disparate situation with 10% having wealth and 90% not having wealth, because it leads to social problems like crime, right? Because when you have that much of the society not having and so few actually having, it discontent, and lots of other things, and it leads to crime, and then you end up, Winford, having to function as a buffer zone for Peter George.
It is 12. It is let me step in here for a moment. It's 15 minutes before the top of the hour. The voices you're hearing is that of Dr. Winford James, Rhoda Bharath, and Errol Pilgrim. That whole area of what's leading to crime is part of what Errol is contending. Yeah, that if the education system fail, folks, and Dr. James say, for instance, instance, and accurately. So we must find solutions. But I think you will concur that we must articulate, we must recognize you, Rhoda, Errol, part of the intelligentsia. So you're seeing inside the baseball team. There are a lot of people who, as Errol opened his column with, who do not even want to go in that direction of discussion. And if you don't go into that direction, you don't recognize it. If you don't recognize it, you're not arresting it. So to a great extent, I was moved by Errol's column because what it did, it was put it on the burner again. Yes. Now, to you folks, you've been there before because that's what the intelligentsia does. But what Errol, I thought from his article was doing, and not defending him, he's right here. What I thought he was doing here was putting squarely on the burner. These are the problems. We conflate the media, the role of media in this.
You still appear to be defending him.
No, not defending at all.
I'm just saying that it was an introductory article.
Yes, and I concur with that.
And there's much more to say. And I know Errol has much more to say.
Let's pass the microphone to Errol.
I'm saying he has not finished talking.
Yes.
In fact, if he could motivate the intelligentsia to join the conversation, fine. But such a conversation has to be rooted in evidence. There must be evidentiary information. And that is not available in Errol's article so far because he doesn't have it. I mean, at the time he wrote, it was not at hand. But it's available.
Your conclusion, Errol, what brought you?
Yeah.
Well, I think the one of the objectives of the article is being voiced here today. I mean, the fact that we have got the conversation going.
Yes.
So that was one of my objectives. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad that Dr. James brought in both Rhoda and brought in the question of Mario and Peter George and so on, and the things they had to say, because it is I don't know if it is coincidence. I really do not believe much in coincidences. But it has happened at a time when their patron, Anthony Sabga, is no more. Mm-hmm. And he is one of the people who kept a lid on this sort of thing happening.
Yeah.
Because he realized that once that community started talking out of turn, people are going to focus their attention on them. Yeah. And the focus may not be the kind of focus they would want. Yeah. Because the same way we're talking about how they amass their wealth and so on, all of that would come into the focus.
Yeah. But even whether Peter George or Mario Sabga Bood spoke out of turn does not affect the reality of the situation. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's brought it perhaps to a head. Mm-hmm. But the situation remains, the situation of heavily unequal distribution of wealth has been so for a long time and still remains. Mm-hmm. Political parties do not handle it on the hustings. But when they get into the power, they use a system of contracts to enrich mostly their own constituency.
But not only when they get into power, but they get into power sometimes as a result of the involvement of these people financially.
And these things have helped to a certain extent. But there are elements of poverty and impoverishment in this country, which you are focused on, that are intolerable.
Definitely.
And that are leading to crime. And that are leading to despair. And somehow politics has to fix that. Mm-hmm. The politics has not fixed that.
Well, if you're going to say politics has to fix that, then we need to start talking about things like campaign finance reform.
Yes.
Because when a group can talk about being the most powerful group in the country, and even if all they're referring to is their economic strength, you need to start asking whether economic strength has also parlayed itself into political influence.
Yes.
And so whether if as the economic powerhouse, you have now become the political powerhouse of the country. Yeah. And if that is the case, the only way that we can keep tabs on how wealth is being distributed or not distributed is through campaign finance reform, to see who are the persons that are funding political parties and whether or not they are receiving favorable treatment as a result of their funding of political parties.
Well, yes, one of the major ways of going about it, yes. Not the only way, but one of the major ways.
Well, I agree that it's not the only way, but I think it's one of the major ways, and it's one of the things that we're skirting right now. There has long been this sense that that the Middle Eastern community here, and I prefer to call them Middle Eastern and Syrian, but I agree with what Dr. James has said, ethnicity is something that is very specific to context. And if you've got a group of Syrians settled here, people are going to refer to them as the Syrian ethnic group. The Middle Eastern community here has long since it's seen to be controllers of political parties.
Yes.
It's a truth.
Particularly the PNM.
Money always gives you access. Hence the reason, we've spent a lot of time here on Brunch dealing with this whole question of electoral reform as far as contribution is concerned. Because at any point, anywhere in the world, you're going to find it's called paid access. Those who make the contribution are going to have the access. And there's such a thing called quid pro quo. You don't just clap this hand, they must slam together. So the question has to be transparency in this whole process, because that starts to deal with that bigger issue of who is getting the favor, who's getting the contract. And of course, by virtue of somebody getting the contract, it's going to marginalize certain communities or inequitably have the resources of the country distributed, Errol.
And you see how widespread the issues are coming from this question of the distribution of wealth of the country. Because if we are talking finance reform of the elections and so on, we have to ask the question whether Rowley or Dr. Rowley has the testicular fortitude or the control and the independence, the political independence, to take the bull by the horns and to bring the kind of policy and legislation that would nip this thing in the bud.
It depends on what kind of participation you need from the opposition when you do this. Because I remember during the United States elections, for instance, everybody was talking about campaign finance reform, and at one time Hillary Clinton said of Bernie Sanders, she said, "I will go all the way for this, but not as long as my opponent has access to the rules." So at what point do you stop this, and how do you go about stopping it? At the end of the day, campaigns are very expensive things, and it does raise the question. Maybe we should look at it in the context of matching funds. Maybe we should look at it in the context that it be paid by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as far as your campaign being paid and controlling the amount of money that goes into this, and thus cutting off the access of certain people. That is a possibility. It's a costly one, but it is a possibility.
It's an ideal possibility if it could happen. Because, certain people are not going to want to give up the political clout that they can buy.
Yeah, it would be the case of two twins. You go first. No, you go first. No, you go first, because nobody wants to go first.
The problem can be in part resolved by transparency. You require all companies, all state agencies that offer contract to publish all their deliberations without fail, so that people would see. So that and the question, of course, of access to information, we do have that on the books now. But, if we knew, for example, that there was a big $1 million contract and we had different companies, and if we knew how the voting went, what the conditions were, how many of them were satisfied by whom and what, over time, I think that would help.
There's another option, and it would also require testicular fortitude, and it is linked to the Board of Inland Revenue. We need there are a number of ways to redistribute wealth, and proper taxing and making sure that all groups fall into the tax net in the right ways is one thing. And then also, if you're looking at the whole business of campaign financing, you should make that one of the things that you have to declare on an annual basis. How much money did you, because technically political parties are like NGOs, right? So how much money did you donate or contribute to NGOs annually? Regardless of which NGO, how much money did you contribute to these NGOs on an annual basis? Let that be part of the tax declaration. And it becomes very simple to trace and see now who has given money and for what. But again, it takes testicular fortitude.
The Freedom of
like
Information Act is going to be one. The question of organizations to ask for total transparency is going to be another one. The BIR, without question, is important here. And that's why I was encouraged by the lady who was just sworn in to ensure that we speed up the establishment of the BIR in an effective way.
Let me just make one little point, Rennie. Have you heard, how many of the ministers in Dr. Rowley's government have you heard discussing things that we are discussing here now?
Maybe they're discussing it, but I'm not hearing it.
I'm talking publicly.
Publicly, yes,
People
I'm not
get
hearing
into
it, yeah.
office and you don't really know what they stand for. And that allows a prime minister to become a king. Because everybody looks to him for guidance and judgment. It's almost as if by making him prime minister, you endow him, you confer upon him total superiority of knowledge and intellect. We don't have the kind of consultation with the publics that constitute this country that we should. We don't have that sort of thing. And we don't have a situation where the people who represent a community really stand up and give forth their views and what they stand for, what are the issues that are most important. That never happens.
There are two sides to this. One of them Rhoda raised a moment ago when she talked about the role of media in demonizing and marginalizing and creating this problem, which Errol alluded to. And the other side, of course, is having programs like these where folks can actually sit down and have a conversation and not do soundbite radio and just run down the road and say, oh, I got you. Oh, that's scandalous. Oh, that's so and so.
Right.
It's a case of sitting down to try to have that conversation. Errol, you're shaking your head, and I can see you begging to get in there. Go ahead.
No, I agree entirely with what you're saying. I'm shaking my head because I agree. The media has a very significant role to play in all of this. I remember in the early days of the Express was a crusading newspaper. You know, you had the debates between Lloyd Bess and Millett on the regional integration process and so on. And then you had the question of the Public Order Act. And the Express opened up its pages to a debate, the likes of which this country had never seen. And the Williams had to call and Carl to remove the Public Order Act, you know, and so on. Because there were very draconian provisions involved in this.
Yes.
And we have an opportunity now because, you see, the media, like I said, is taking the easy way out. You know, they're dealing with topics that are not fundamental to the development of a society. We have not developed a society here yet.
It is part of the problem. It is part of the problem we have because it is easy. If it bleeds, it leads. So everybody's going to take a sensational picture of somebody shot. It's going to be on the front page every minute of the day. And instead of having long conversations like what you spoke about and having participation from the audience, I want to go across to the importance of the internet right now because Rhoda is a blogger. So we're talking about, are political parties here savvy sufficient? Are they aware of the power of the blogosphere? Are they aware of the power of social media, and are they using it to get the message out to people where you find conventional or terrestrial radio failing?
I think both of the two leading political parties, both the PNM and the UNC, are very aware of the influence of social media and the blogosphere, but I think that one political party sees it as one political party sees the use of it as being more important than another political party. So you will find that the UNC People's Partnership, however you want to call them, they have been the ones to use it far more actively as a tool for putting out their particular message and propaganda, and as well as generating interest or disinterest in particular issues and situations. The People's National Movement has been nothing short of scared of using social media properly. They're beginning to make baby steps. But I'm not quite yet sure that they feel confident using social media as a way to direct narratives. Now, the thing with that is, what you would have is simply a situation where the politics has moved from being discussed in traditional media, whether it's on radio or print or television, and moving into a new sphere. You would still require having people who are balanced and who are intelligent and who are willing to do the research, to have discussions and to lead discussions and to sustain discussions. Because that's the other thing. We don't really, we don't always make an effort to sustain discussions. And I've said to you privately, it's one of the things that I enjoy about this program, right? That you sustain the discussion. You may not be engaging with the same topic week after week after week, but you consistently return to the topics and have your guests return to further elaborate on the topics. And if if we're treating with things in a very superficial way, then what happens is there's a lot of hysteria about things, a lot of misinformation about things, a lot of misunderstanding about things, and we're not reflecting. And that's the other thing. We don't reflect as a society.
You say something very important there, which links into exactly the point that Dr. James made, and you took it out of my mind, because I am saying his point is well taken, of course, that we have to start looking at the solutions. You opened the door, we walked in there. Unfortunately, I've got the constraints of time, but the next time, Dr. James, I ask you back here, I'm going to make sure we have a panel, if not the same panel, to discuss solutions, because that is the point. At the end of the day, you know, as I said, you have to recognize there's a problem. I thought we recognized the problem here, that while the intelligent people amongst us, you know, the group that makes it their business, they knew the problem there all the time. But now everybody knows about it. Now we start to say, let's confront it, let's find a way around it and find out how we can deal with it. The consensus I got, if I am correct, from the conversation, is that, Rhoda, you believe this is a bigger problem than just a black problem. I deal specifically as it relates to Errol's article. You think it is a classism issue we're dealing with, a working class issue. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Errol, you hold firm that you still believe it is a marginalized community, a marginalized group, an isolated group, or you in concert with what is said here?
Well, I hold firm to what I believe to be not a level playing field.
Yes.
That is disadvantageous to the black community.
I'm going to give the doctor the final word in this area, because I've got one final point before I go. But doctor, you get the final word on this one.
Well, let me say I was happy to participate in this discussion. It's a start. Discussions don't end because issues hardly end. They resurrect themselves over time, but we keep engaged with them, hopefully changing minds as we go. And this is just a start. And Errol's article was a stimulus for this conversation and for the kind of contribution I personally came to make.
That I am going to wait till the next time when we get together, and we will not have that far away. I do want to leave with asking all of you one question. I thought a very interesting thing happened. Gentleman a person, I'm not too sure I want to use that, a person on the internet decided that the Prime Minister, his wife, and or his children should be harmed to satisfy his anger at what he is seeing happening in the country by a crime. He was arrested. I think that is a very good sign, a shot across the bow, as it were, to those who seek to use either the anonymity of the internet or use this now available platform to be injudicious at best and totally reckless.
I would say if he broke the law, then he should feel the brunt of the law. That's what I would say.
Paul, that's almost a political answer. Rhoda, you are a blogger, so you're there all the time. What do you think of that? Him being arrested for really asking that harm be brought to the Prime Minister, his wife, or his children?
I believe that once there are laws that he has violated here, then he should pay the consequence of the crime. And I've said that from the very get-go. As soon as I saw the photograph, I said, I believe that we have laws that govern this.
Yes.
If he's broken the laws, face the consequences. Let him be charged and let him go through the courts just like everybody else.
I hear that, Errol.
Well, I believe a threat of harm to any individual should be pursued by the law. Mm-hmm. In the same way that the lady senator, who is now a senator, former justice minister, was proposing that people be poisoned coming to Trinidad, coming to Tobago. Mm-hmm. That should also have been treated in the way it should be by the law.
Yes, fully agreed.
So that people should, you have to be careful about what you're saying.
I want to thank all my guests for being here with me this morning. We are on top of 12 o'clock. Let me thank Errol Pilgrim, Rhoda Bharath, and Dr. Winford James. Thank you all very much. We hope to do this again very shortly.
Thanks for having us.